Hi, welcome back to my channel. So I got another lovely set of pencils. These are called the Marco Tribute Masters Collection, and each one of the color sets is attributed to a famous artist. This set of blues is for Van Gogh. The next one, if I can get that back in, is Cezanne. These are like blue turquoise, kind of greenish blues. The next one is greens for Renoir. And then the blacks and whites for Escher. Kind of orangey browns for Degas. Yellows and oranges for Klimt, very bright set. Reds for Matisse. And the purples and lilacs for Monet. Alright, and today I want to do another water droplet study. So it's going to be another flower with water droplets, but it's going to be a little bit more complex than the last one. I want to do a little bellflower, and I want to be able to see the water droplets on both sides of the petals. So on the front side, there'll be water droplets that you can clearly see sparkling on the front of the petals, and then these back petals are also going to have water droplets, but they're almost like seen through the translucency of the petal, so they're kind of like the shadow of a water droplet. So that's what I'm going to try and achieve. I'm not quite sure I'm happy with the shape of this flower so far, but I'm not exactly sure what I don't like about it. It's hard to sense. I sometimes think, oh, I'm just going to push through and then figure it out, and then sometimes it just doesn't feel right, so I'm starting again, and this time kind of centering my proportions and trying to get the shape more even. Sometimes giving yourself a rough guideline for the center of the object and the rough circumference of the largest part helps you place it on a page. I did of course realize it's now a little bit too large and I don't have the space to put the top petal, so I had to make it a little bit smaller. Now these bottom petals also feel a little bit large because the circle I drew was kind of a rough guide, so it's always okay to edit these little things, but it really does help to have just a kind of a guideline for placement, I find. I'm really struggling with the proportions for this flower because I want it to seem delicate and it just didn't feel like that, so I've made it smaller again, and now I think I'm definitely a lot more happy with this now. Okay, so now that I'm actually happy with the shape of my basic flower, I can go around and add little details and all the water droplets. Again, this one's going to be covered in water droplets, and they're going to be all different shapes and sizes, and they're going to be both on the front petals and the back petals. And just to add more interesting elements and possibly harder to do elements, I'm going to have a few water droplets on the side so they can kind of glisten against the background. Or I'm going to try and see how it goes. Once the basic details are in, I crisp up the outlines and then just dab off the excess pencils with my putty rubber so it doesn't come through when I add the color. And now I need to swatch the colors that I want to use for the flowers. So it's going to be pinks and purples and lilacs, green for the stem and leaves, and I think a blue background. I'm going to try to go for something like bouquet. Some shadows, so I'm testing out a couple of grey and blacks, and yeah, these pencils are quite firm, quite creamy. They blend, and they're actually quite nice. I'm not sure exactly how they compare to the last set I got that were Phoenix color, but I'm gonna find out once I properly start using them. They do feel nice though, and the color is very bright, so I'm hopeful. Now, when it comes to doing the actual water droplets, what I've figured out from my last drawing is that I can pretty much draw a circle around each droplet with the darkest color of the shadow, because on the one side of the circle, that dark color is going to drop a shadow on the outside of the circle, and on the opposite side it's going to come into the circle with shading and get lighter and lighter progressively until the highlight, the kind of glisten of the water droplet, which is always touching the shadow side, which gives it a nice contrast. So the lightest part on the inside of each droplet is always touching the shadow side on the outside of that droplet. And I can kind of progress quite quickly doing them like that as I go. Now, the flower is going to be kind of a lilac purple, and the droplets, because I want them to glisten, I'm starting the dark part of them with a purple and then going into a kind of a pink, because it's almost like they kind of reflect the lightest part of the flower, and I want them to stand out a little bit more, so not just be all purple. They start with a purple and then they turn pink and then they turn white to the highlight. Now, any water droplets that are hanging on the edge of the flower are going to have a blue glisten, or almost kind of purple going into a blue color, because my background is going to be blue, and I want it to feel like you can see the blue background through the water droplet, because you know water's kind of clear and it enhances everything. So the ones on the flower, you can see the flower through them, and the ones on the edge, you can see the background through them. When it comes to shadow placement, I would normally place the shadows consistently on one side. So for example, if the light is coming from the right, the shadow will be on the left, or vice versa. But with this flower, I want it to feel like it's glowing, and I'm gonna have kind of bokeh bubbles of light on either side of it, and possibly a white edge around the whole flower, just to give it that glowing feeling. So what I'm doing with the shadows of the droplets is all the droplets on the left hand side of the flower are getting a right side shadow, and all the droplets on the right side of the flower are getting a left side shadow, which feels like it's being lit up from both sides. When it comes to doing the water droplets on the back petals, they are slightly different because you're not seeing them directly. So you're not seeing the water, you're seeing it through a petal. So it's not essentially going to have that glisten. The ones you see in the front are going to glisten and have that white highlight, whereas the ones you're seeing through the petal are almost like the shadows of the water droplet. So I'm giving them an even shadow around the entire droplet, and filling them in consistently without leaving that kind of glisten on the top of the bubble that you would see from the front side of looking directly at the water, because you are seeing it through the petal. The effect of this should hopefully be more evident once the petals are actually colored in. And as mentioned earlier, the droplets on the side are reflecting the color of the background. And I'm also filling in a little bit of blue on the edges, because I want it to feel like the flower is kind of slightly reflecting the background. And I've put a little hint of blue in the center as well, because that is the most translucent part of the flower. So you kind of like almost sensing the background through the petals. They're so thin you can see the water through them. I thought you might be able to see a hint of the background through them as well. Now, to color in the actual flower, I'm making that back petal a little bit darker. That kind of pushes it back towards the background to sort of say, yeah, that one's further away, that one's in the back. And these insides of the petals that kind of curl up and you can see the inside, I'm making them a slightly cooler color, so you can see the difference between the inside and the outside, as it were, because obviously those parts are in the shadow, and then the rest of it is kind of like this gentle lilac color. And I'm not sure if I don't know if I want to do too many layers of this color because I don't want it to get darker. I quite like the feel of how delicate it is. The pencils are coloring in quite nicely, but I'm not sure. I mean, without adding more layers, I don't know how I'm gonna cover the tooth of the paper. But I'm gonna finish coloring it in first, see how it looks, and then decide. Again, the inside of that bell, doing a slightly cooler color, and just because that top bit in the middle is going to be kind of where the shadows are, and then bringing back that lighter lilac that I did on the front petals, on the top of the front petals, because they're still the same color, they're still the same flower, and I want that to kind of come through. Adding a little bit of the blue, but trying not to add too much because I don't want it to change the color of the flower. There's just like a hint of it in there. Now I've also put water droplets on the stem and leaves of the flower. They might end up being a little bit hard to see because they're going to be blue on green, but I'm doing the droplets first and then filling in the stem and the leaves. And obviously the droplets here are blue because essentially they are against the background, so just lighter blue, slightly different shade of blue with shadows. Again, the same kind of principle, shadows and highlights, and then fill in the green. And once it's all colored in, it's going to be easier to see what, if anything, needs correcting. And yeah, so I plan to actually go ahead and fill in all the background and everything, and then decide. So it'll be a lot easier to see what, if anything, needs more depth and what needs more color, if I need to add more layers, or how I'm going to deal with filling in the tooth of the paper. Because, I mean, normally with pencils I would just add layers, and layers kind of fill in that fill in the whites of the paper. This paper is a watercolor paper, so it's a little bit grainy, which makes the tooth of the paper more visible when using pencils. So perhaps it's not the best paper to use pencils on, but at the same time pencils like a little bit of tooth of paper, and yeah, so these pencils are quite good, and there are ways of dealing with that anyway. So I'm trying to create this bokeh effect in the background, and I'm thinking ahead to what I can do to fill in that tooth without adding a lot of shadows, without adding a lot more layers with pencil. And there are solvents for that. I've got a couple of different ones. There's something called Zest It for pencils, and then there's another one by Windsor and Newton, which is just like an odorless solvent that can be used for different mediums. So I'm gonna try with a little swatch on my swatch pad, see how that goes, and then I might use a solvent on this drawing to kind of get the colors out. So one thing to keep in mind is using solvents on pencil. It does smooth out all those ridges, all those little bits of white, but it also brightens up the color of the actual pencil on the page. But you definitely have to test it. Now, I've tried the Zest It, and it has a slightly yellowing effect that I don't get from the Windsor and Newton one that I normally use. So I'm going with the Windsor and Newton. Now, in order not to actually soak the whole page, I've dabbed one cotton bud into the bottle, and then I've gotten another clean cotton bud, and I'm dabbing it against the soaking wet one just to pick up a little bit of the solvent, and then going around and blending the color that I've put down. Whenever I feel it getting slightly dry, I dab it against the cotton bud again, and then when the soaking wet cotton bud is dried out, I'm gonna dab it into the bottle again because it's still clean, or grab a new one if there's any kind of patches on it. And as you can see, the color of the pencils that I put down, as I mentioned earlier, is getting a lot brighter just by being blended with the solvent. And I'm quite liking this pinky lilac that it's created. It's really nice. I might have to try these pencils again where I layer them just to get the full effect of the actual pencils of the, by themselves. But I think this particular picture really needed the the solvent touch, because I didn't want it to get dark. I really wanted to keep it very delicate. Another thing to note is when blending out with solvents, start with the lightest color and blend out, because the cotton bud or whatever you might use a paper stump or something, or even a paintbrush, will pick up some of the color that you've got that you're blending, and it is possible to drag the dark color into the lighter color. So starting with the lighter and working in towards the darker. I'm leaving this bottom edge for last, where I've added the black pencil for shadows, and I think the effect of it is quite nice. I'm just adding the highlights, and then I'm gonna go around and add the glow as well, just using a white pen here. Well, that's about it for this one. Please let me know in the comments what you think, or if you have any tips or tricks for doing water droplets or blending pencils. I'd really love to hear it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more random art. Thanks a lot. See you soon.